we saw that we were able to save data into the database, but we don't see the data. So we need to load the data from the database instead of getting a random array of strings that I generated because I just wanted to. So let's write the code to get the data from the database. So the first thing is, if I'm loading the students from the database and it's related to the students, I'm going to use the student data access object. Remember, when you instantiate a student DAO, you need to pass the context, which is the activity itself. So I'm passing the activity. So what I want to do is to introduce a local variable, which is the DAO, data access object, and then I have this DAO, and I can ask for this DAO, please give to me a list of all our students. So I'm not creating an array anymore. Arrays are like primitive types that don't relate to the objects. They don't have like the phone number, the grading, and all this information that I might need and so on. Notice that I just said might need. It's not that I need. But so far, what I'm going to do is ask all the information. I want to load all the students and their information to the memory. All their information. So I'm going to load the list of students as students. And how I'm going to do this? I'm going to ask for the data access object to list all students. So I'm going to get just all. I'm going to list all students. And that's it. So I can remove this line here. So what I want to do is to create this method here, list all. So create method list all. It returns a list of students. That's true. So how do I return a list of students? I have to create this list. So that's my students. So I'll just create the list of students as students as a new array list. And that's it. And I'm happy that this array list is a list of students. This is my list of students. I'm happy with that. Pretty happy. Are you happy with that? I'm happy with that. So this is my list of students. So what I want to do is go to the database. How? So we need access to the database. How do we get access to the database? The same way that we got here the get writable database, we can get a writable database. We are not writing anything. We are just reading data. If we are just reading data, we can say so, get readable database. So you know that if you have access to such a variable, you cannot insert anything. You can just read information. So you know that it might do something more optimized. It might do something. It might. It's not that it will. Might do something more optimized because it knows it's just reading information. It's not writing information. So let's get the readable database. So I'll just create a local variable here. Again, I'm calling it database. And what I'm going to do with this database is I'm going to run a query. But this query is just a raw query. I just want to say, please run this, select everything from students. So I'm just going to say database, please. Database, please. Sorry, database, please. Raw query. And then within the raw query, I'm going to say, what is the query that I want to use? Select everything from students. That's what I want to run. And then I have to pass another argument. Again, these arguments are optional, but to say that it's optional, we have to pass a null value here. So that's me just saying, please execute this query. And it returns to you a cursor. And this cursor is pointing right before the first line of the results. It's just like a result set in JDBC, or just like a cursor or result set or record set in so many different languages. So it's just pointing right before the first line, before the first line, not at the first line, before the first line. So let's create this variable here, introduce new local variable. I'm going to call it cursor to be, oops, again, I'm going to create the variable here. Oops. So this is my cursor, and it's right before the first line, right? So if it's right before the first line, what I want to do is, if there is a next line, please move to the next line. So I can say, I can tell to the cursor, please move to the next line. Move to the next returns a boolean saying either true, there was a next line and I'm pointing at it right now, or false, there's no next line, it's the end of the data that you required. So in our case, we can loop through it. While there's a line to read, please read this line. So we start before the first line. We move to the first, we move to the second, to the third, to the fourth, until there's nothing else. When there's nothing else, it returns false, and it goes here to the next line. So for each line that the cursor is pointing to, each one of those lines represents what? A student. If each one of those lines represents a student, I can create a student. So let's get the information for a student, right? Let's read the information from each one of these lines. So first, its name. What is the student name? The student name is, I can ask for the cursor for the string content, get string. And then it's asking for the column index. Well, what is the column index for the column name? Is it the 1, 2 or 1, 2, 3? Maybe it returns in another order. I don't know the order it's coming from. I could know if I explicitly say something here, but maybe somehow dangerous. So instead of just saying get string for the second column, that's the name column. Well, no, I have no idea what is the name column. So I can ask the cursor, please cursor, what is the column index for the column name, for this column here? And it returns an integer. That's the second column, for example. So if that's the second column, I can say, cursor, please get the string for the second column. And that's the name. That's the name, my boy. So that's the name that I want. So after I get the name, I need to ask for all the other fields. So I have the name, then I get the address equals cursor, get string, cursor, get column index, address. Then we can get what else? The phone number. Cursor, get string, cursor, get column index, phone number. And we can do so for the other two text fields that are missing, which are the websites and the email. Finally, we need to get the value of the grading. So the grading is the, what is it? Is it a string? No, it's not a string. It's a double field, right? We created it as a double, and it's a real value over there. So it's a double. Let me get a double then. It's not a get a string, it's get double. Let's get the column index, and the name of the index is grading. Okay, so that's the grading. Good, I have all those fields. Now I can create a student. And pass as arguments everything that I have. The name, the address, the phone number, the website, the email, and finally the grading. And we have all those fields set to us. So here I have the student. For each one of the lines that I have in my database, I have the student in my hands. Here it is, the student is here. But I need to get this student and put it into our list of students. So let's get the list of students and add the student to it. So now finally I have a full list of students that I can return. So let's go back to the student list activity. So what we did here was we created the data access object, we listed the students, and then we used the students list to display all the students to us. But if you go back a little bit, remember that we closed in the form activity, we remembered to close the data access object connection. And that's a little bit weird because here I remember after inserting to close what I have just opened. But in this case here, I forgot to do that. And that's kind of dangerous. So one of the patterns that you see a lot, it's not that it's the best or the only one, you can choose whichever you like, but you can choose the one that fits you properly. So what we are doing is we ask for the list of students, and then we use this list of students to render the students one by one into the view. But to do so, remember we just use the database. If you use the database, after you used it, you close it. Remember to close the database. And that's a pattern that you have to keep repeating yourself if you are instantiating DAOs by yourself. If you're instantiating by yourself and getting access to the connection by yourself, you need to remember to close it by yourself. And that's something you need to pay attention to. So we just closed, you used, you closed the connection, okay? Of course, if an exception occurs at this line, the connection might be open. So you need to take care and use try, catch, and finally blocks in order to catch all the possible exceptions and play with the finally block to close the connections that weren't closed. In our case, I'm just sticking to the close right after I searched for the entire students list. And finally here, you can see that this guy here, the array adapter, is not an array adapter of strings anymore. It's an array adapter of students. So I'm going to stick to students here and here. So it adapts a list or an array of students into the layout that we want. So that's what I'm doing. Not a string, not a list or array of strings, but a list or array of students. And that's what it's going to adapt to our view. So let's start our application again and see what happens. So I'm going to go to the emulator here, close our application. Notice that we don't have the old array anymore, so it should not display to us all that list of names, random names that we created a long time ago. So let's try to build it from scratch. So I'll just try to rebuild the project and then run it. While it compiles and builds the project, let's just check what we did. So first, we are loading the data from the database, loading each and every student from the database, and then displaying it with the same array adapter that we have used before. Just instead of using an array adapter of strings, we are using an array adapter of students. We can improve that, and we will be improving every time we go through this code. And when we go to the form and try to save the student, we also open a connection with the database, and we try to insert the student into the database. So how did we implement the insert method and the list all methods? The insert method was getting a writable database and putting the data for each and every field, and then asking, please insert into this table. And the list all method is an implementation which looks like a result set implementation in JDBC in Java, or any other result set or similar record set in any language. You just get a cursor to the first line just before the first line, doing your select. So you're just right before the first line. Then you move to the first line, read the data. Move to the second line, read the data. Move to the third line, read the data. While move to next returns true, it means that you are in a valid line, so you can read this information. When it returns false, it means you just went through all the data that you had returned, so you can just stop it now. And that's why we do the loop in the move to next method. And that's what we did. So let's try to run the application. So I just compiled, and I can now run the application. The application is running, and we have 1 student. Win! Why do we have 1 student? I just said we should have zero students. Well, remember we just tried the application once, and we tried the student form. I tried the student form, and I added something there. I added 1 student. So this is the student that was added. Well, that's a pretty ugly student, as it is right now.